My name is Annika Delén, and I'm a gender equality officer in Umeå, and this is what it looks like outside my window, more or less right now. We're in the middle of the winter here in the north of Sweden. Thank you very much for inviting me today to come and talk a little bit about some practical examples from Umeå. And when I listened to Mary's talk, I was like, oh, I have an example of that. I have a comment of that, but I already prepared my presentation. So maybe I'll give some more examples if we have time for questions. Anyway, what I want to talk about today is to give you 3 examples of how we include a gender perspective when we talk about public space and play. And I'm not going to focus on small children. I'm going to focus more on spaces for youth and adolescents. But the first example is actually ties very closely to the skateboard park example that Mary gave about including girls in a male coded space. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the public spaces specifically for girls. As Ileana mentioned as well, creating a city for girls is a city for everyone. And then I'm also going to talk about I'm going to show you a short video that some youth workers here in Umeå did about how they work with gender equality when they design youth centers. But first of all, just to give you an idea, this is Umeå. It's in the north of Sweden, and we are a little bit north of Stockholm. It's snowy and wintry right now, and Umeå is about the 10th largest city in Sweden, and we have and we're a growing city, so we have a vision for growth, and our vision for growth in Umeå explicitly states that the growth of the city should be with maintained social, economic, cultural, and environmental sustainability. And when we talk about social sustainability, gender equality is a very fundamental part of our work with social sustainability. And we have also an overall goal for gender equality in the city, which is to create conditions for women and men to have equal power to shape society and their own lives. So that's kind of the framework when we work with gender equality. And we're also connected to Mary through the Gendered Landscape Network in urbact. It's an action planning network, and it's urbact's first action planning network, where urbact's first action planning network on gender, where Mary is the lead expert and we are the lead partner. So the first example I have, I'm gonna move on to the practical examples because I know time is running, is specifically about the skateboard park. We have a skateboard park in Umeå. We built it around 2010, 2011 as a part of a project where we were kind of redesigning the whole park area along the river that goes through the center of Umeå. And as we know, a skateboard park in most places is a very male-coded space. When you think of a skateboarder, most people picture a man or a boy, and we know that more boys than girls practice skateboarding. So this is something that we wanted to include in the planning from the beginning, because as Mary said, if you just go ahead and plan without thinking of these things, you might actually build in gender inequalities. So one of the first things was, where do we place the park? this skateboard park. And this skateboard park is placed along the river. And on the one hand, it's placed close to where people walk, because it's a long park along the river. So people walk by, and we know that girls feel more unsafe than boys, and women feel more unsafe than men in public space in general. And sometimes skateboard parks are placed in like old industrial areas, and who feels safe to hang out there, and how do you get there, and how do you go away? And we know that people feel safer if they're in company of other people. So where there's in a place where there's a lot of movement and people walk by, you feel seen, you feel that if something happens, people are around and they see me. And that is a factor that generates safety. And also this park is placed right next to a youth center, and this youth center is the youth center in Umeå, which with the most gender balanced participation, because of girls and boys. It's almost 50-50 girls and boys that attend this youth center. So that was also a reason. Then we also worked actively when we built this park to involve this association called 𝐒𝐳𝐧𝐬𝐺, which is an association that works with specifically with girls and they have workshop with girls to teach skateboarding, and to kind of encourage girls to feel entitlement and entitled to use this space right from the beginning, because that's also important to have it in the beginning, to know that when we open this space, when we inaugurate this space, we will have girls there, and we have actively encouraged girls. And we also have civil society involvement, in the sense that the rules for using the park, they are agreed together with the skate and BMX association, local association, that also actively today works with. They have specific nights for girls and try to actively include girls. So that's one way of doing this. But I'm going to give you another example, because even though you can and you should actively work with changing norms in spaces that are specifically female or male coded, we also know from data and statistics that girls participate in active sports. They stop participating actively in sports earlier than boys. We know that girls continue until they're maybe 14, and boys until they're maybe 16 in Sweden. Might be different in other parts. So we know that if we build public spaces and we invest public funds in spaces, in public space for physical activity, we kind of disproportionately invest our money in boys. So in the same project, a few years later, when we were remodeling the other side of the park, we wanted to actively work with girls to create a space for girls, both because of this knowledge that we know that when we create spaces for physical activity, which is usually what we do when we create spaces for youth in public space, we invest in more in boys than in girls. But also we also know that teenage girls are generally underrepresented in dialogue about in planning spaces. So for this space, we did a dialogue specifically with young girls. We call it inclusion through exclusion. So in order to include teenage girls, we excluded everyone else from the dialogue. And we had a process with 3 groups of girls between 15 and 20 years old, And we had different workshops. And we also had involvement from the university, the researchers there who helped us create the workshops. And we talked a lot about what it's like being a young girl, a young teenage girl in Umeå today. And what came out of that was that the girls expressed a lot that they feel a lot of like double expectations, like you should look really pretty, but you shouldn't, nobody should tell that you wear makeup. You should be really good at school, but you should also not spend too much time on homework because you should always be available for your friends. You should speak your mind, but you should never be any trouble, etc. So what they expressed was that they wanted a place free from these expectations. They wanted a place where they could just hang out with their friends and not having to perform and like do something. They just wanted a place to sit and hang out with their friends. And of course, also another issue was that they wanted to feel safe, to feel seen, to have a place where you could enter and exit in many different directions, where you don't feel like you sit on a stage where everybody can watch you. And of course, also Wi-Fi and music and charge your cell phone. So this kind of, these swings are in a place, I don't know if you see my mouse, but this is the river and this is a strolling path beside the river. So a lot of people move around there, walk by. You can sit there and hang out. You can sit in different chairs, so you can be closer to where people move and further away from them. There is also speakers in the roof, so you can connect your cell phone through Bluetooth and listen to music, which is also a way of taking ownership of a place. But we also worked with norm critical design in the actual space. So for example, the backrests here in these swings or in these seats, they are adapted for a person who is 160 centimeters tall, which is the average height of a teenage girl. So, because that's also a question that you need to ask, like, whose body gets to be the norm when we design spaces? Whose body fits in the spaces that we design? And the last I wanted to show you is a video that some youth workers that are part of a gender equality group among the youth workers did for another project where Iljana participates as well, and I think it fit very well. So I'm gonna show it to you, and please scream if you don't hear. I tested the sound before and it worked, so please scream if you don't hear. It's louder when they start speaking. Yes.
Hello. Hello. Today we're going to talk about how objects and activities can be coded as male or female.
We're also going to talk about the importance of how youth workers' attitudes and behaviors impacts our young people.
We're going to show you both bad examples and good examples.
What's the first thing you see when you enter the youth center? Is it the pool table that is typically coded as a male object? Or is it the cafe that is a gender-neutral space?
We all know that the first impression is incredibly important for the rest of the experience. Would you go back to a place where you didn't feel like you belong? Probably not, and the same applies to our youth participants. That's why it's important that their first reaction is, "This is for me." That's why we choose the neutral option.
Would you feel safe walking in this dark area at night when you were 15 years old? Most of us wouldn't feel safe, and that's why the placement is significant.
The question we need to ask ourselves is, how can we make our young people feel safer?
This youth center is placed in a neighborhood where there's a lot of movement. Neighbors, parents and other adults. And of course our youngsters. It's also placed near the local grocery store and the library. And that brings us to our next stop, the entrance.
Hi Lana, nice to meet you. The youth workers will see everyone that visits the centers, and also the youngsters will be welcomed by staff and friends.
Hello!
Hi, nice to see you!
Here you can see there's a lot of seating areas, and the coloring and wall decorations are gender neutral.
The thought of having black, grey and white walls may be a little depressing. But you can change that by letting the youth participants create the decorations, like this one.
To name the rooms is a trap we usually fall into. It's better to let the activities in the rooms be flexible, let the participants have an open mind how to use the space. If you don't have access to a lot of different rooms, you can create a defined space within the room. To have a more open space makes it easier to access for everyone.
When we talk about access, it's also important to talk about content. For example, what video games are displayed? Is it games like this?
Or neutral, like this?
Now you've done all the changes you need to create a gender-neutral youth center.
Or have you? The most important tool in making a gender-equal youth center is we, the youth workers.
It's our responsibility to lead by example.
This means to be aware of what we do and why we do it.
And the importance of our role in making a safe space where every youth feels empowered.
Yes, I'll send you, I can send you the link. They also did this checklist that they translated for the other networks. So I'll send it to Ileana through email if you want to have it. So I know I took a lot of time, I think, so I'm gonna wrap up. Mary mentioned data is really important. Data to really identify and make visible where do we have a problem? Do we have a problem? Where is it? What is it? Analyze why is this happening? Why is it a problem? And through that, make the changes. And just when Mary talked, I just added this last image when she talked about the street signs, because in Sweden since 2008, there are two official pedestrian crossing signs. You can either have a woman or a man. So most pedestrian crossings have one on each side of the street, because representation, of course, is always important. And that's all for me. And I'm sorry I took too much time, I think. Anyway, now I'll leave to the next person.